Warning: the Hayes Nation may stimulate personal growth and prosperity. Participation is strongly advised.
Well, on the show today, something has been stolen from American men, quietly and systematically. One sitcom, one classroom, one social media attack, and one headline at a time. And there's a lot of men who didn't even notice it was gone. That is, until they went looking for it and it wasn't there anymore. Today, we're going to name exactly what was stolen, and that is leadership, protection, truth-telling, wisdom, and kindness, the things that make a man a man. Today, we open up the blueprint God wrote for what a man actually is. It's all of those things, and men shouldn't have to apologize for a single one of them. And today, I hand you the plan to take it all back, beginning this week, starting in your own house. All that and more, and it starts right now. Okay, well, welcome to the George Hayes Radio Podcast. I'm your host, George Hayes. If you want to reach me directly, send me an email at georgehayes@usa.com. That's georgehayes@usa.com. And if you're watching on YouTube, leave me a comment below. And finally, go to hayesnation.com to join a community of like-minded individuals who believe in faith, freedom, and prosperity. Now, today's topic is a heavy one. We're in the middle of a full-blown identity crisis among American men. Marriage rates are down, fatherlessness is up. Men are dropping out of college, they're dropping out of the workforce, and they're dropping out of their own families. Not because they're lazy, but because somewhere along the way, they were told the very thing that made them a man was the problem. I don't believe that. I spent over 40 years leading men on job sites, from operating bucket trucks and backhoes to classrooms and boardrooms. And I can tell you, the traits that build a life, build a family, and build a country have not changed. They may have gotten hijacked, and today we're taking them back. So let's start with the obvious question. If God designed men to lead, to protect, to tell the truth, to be wise and kind, how did we get here? How did an entire generation of men get talked into believing their own nature was the problem? The answer is simple. It didn't happen all at once. It happened one message at a time over decades until it became the water we swim in. So let's go back to the blueprint, before culture ever got its hands on it, and let's see exactly how it got stolen, one pillar at a time. So the first pillar, is leadership and protection. Turn all the way back to Genesis, before sin ever entered the picture. Genesis chapter 2, verse 15 tells us, the Lord God took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and keep it. Work it, keep it. Two verbs, labor and guard. That is the first job description ever given to a man. And God gave it before the fall, before there was ever anything to blame on brokenness. Leadership and protection aren't damage control for a broken world. They are the original design. God built work and guarding into man before the fall ever happened, not after. Fast forward a few thousand years and look at Nehemiah. Jerusalem's wall is in rubble. Enemies are threatening on every side, and Nehemiah organizes the men of the city to rebuild with a trowel in one hand and a sword in the other. Nehemiah chapter 4, verse 17 describes exactly how. Those who built the wall and those who carried burdens, everyone with one hand labored on the work and with the other held his weapon. Nehemiah rebuilt the wall with a trowel in one hand and a sword in the other. That's not two jobs. That's what a man is. Let's look at Boaz in the book of Ruth, a man of means in a position of power over a vulnerable widow. And what does he do with that power? He protects her. He provides for her. He makes sure nobody touches her in his fields long before he has any guarantee she'll ever be his wife. Boaz said in Ruth chapter 2, verses 8 and 9, I have charged the young men not to touch you. That's what protection looks like when it isn't about control. It's about covering somebody who can't cover themselves and expecting nothing in return. Look at Joseph, sold into slavery by his own brothers, wrongly imprisoned for years. And when Pharaoh finally put him in charge of all of Egypt, what does he do with that power? He provides. He protects an entire nation, including his own family, through 7 years of famine. Joseph told his brothers in Genesis chapter 50, verse 20, You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive. Joseph had every reason in the world to use his power for revenge. He used it to keep his family alive instead. That's what a real man does with power. Now, here's where the theft happened. Somewhere in the last few decades, our culture took the word leadership and welded it to the word oppression. It took the word protector and welded it to the word controlling. And it did so thoroughly that an entire generation of men started apologizing for wanting to lead their own households. They didn't ask men to lead better. They told men leadership itself was the crime, even toxic. And a generation of men pled guilty to something God assigned them before sin ever existed. You don't have to take my word for it that something is broke. Richard Reeves, a policy researcher, not a pastor, not a talk show host, has documented it in hard numbers. Men falling out of college at rates that should alarm everybody. Men checking out of the workforce. Men disappearing from their kids' lives. He's not making a moral argument. He's just counting. What about Ann Case and Angus Deaton? Both Princeton economists gave it a name a few years back. They called it deaths of despair. They found rising suicide, rising overdose, rising alcohol-related deaths are concentrated heavily among working men who lost a sense of purpose and place. When you tell a man his God-given role is toxic, don't be surprised when he checks out. Sometimes literally. By stripping a man of purpose, you don't get equality, you get despair. That's not my opinion. That's what the data says. And lastly, roughly 1 in 4 kids in this country is growing up in a home without their father present. Let that sink in. Now, it's not a coincidence of modern life. That's the fruit of telling men for generations that their leadership and protection are not needed. All right, that brings us to the second pillar, truth and integrity. A man whose words mean something. Paul, addressing Titus in Titus chapter 2, verse 2 through 8, said, sober, reverent, self-controlled, sound in faith, in all things showing yourself to be a pattern of good works, sound speech that cannot be condemned, Now, Paul isn't giving Titus a suggestion here. He's giving him a standard. A man's speech should be so sound enough that nobody can find a legitimate accusation against it. Not perfect, sound, reliable, consistent. So take Daniel, a Jewish exile serving inside a pagan empire that had every reason to hate him. Daniel chapter 6, verse 4 tells us even his enemies had to admit this. They could find no ground for complaint or corruption because he was faithful and no error or fault was found in him. That is the standard right there. Not that somebody disagreed with him. They hated him enough to throw him to the lions. But that nobody could find an actual fault in his conduct. That's integrity strong enough to survive hostile scrutiny. Now, look at David, young, anointed, on the run from a king actively hunting him down to kill him. David gets a clean shot at Saul in a cave, his own men telling him God delivered his enemy right into his hands. And David refuses to raise a hand against him because Saul is still God's anointed king. David had his enemy unarmed and able to strike. He didn't, because real strength knows the difference between what you can do and what you should do. Let's look at George Washington. And look, I don't bring him up for patriotism's sake. I bring him up because the man built a reputation on being almost boringly honest. When the war ended and half the country expected him to become king, he handed back his commission and walked away from power voluntarily. It's said that King George III remarked that if Washington actually did that, he'd be the greatest man in the world. Well, he did it. The most powerful man in America had the whole country ready to crown him king, and he handed back his sword and went home to his farm. That's not weakness. That's the strongest thing a man can do. And on other founding fathers, John Adams, years before the Revolution, agreed to defend the British soldiers charged in the Boston Massacre. Wildly unpopular, it could have ended his career before it started. He did it anyways because he believed every man, even an enemy soldier, deserved a fair defense under the law. Now, that's integrity that costs something. That's the only kind that counts. Here's the theft on this pillar. We live in an era of personal branding, spin, and my truths. Manners like please, thank you, yes ma'am, holding a door get mocked as outdated performance instead of what they actually are. Small, daily proofs that your word and your conduct can be trusted. Manners were never about performance. They are small daily traits that prove your word is good. Culture calls that outdated. God calls it integrity. Solomon put it plainly in Proverbs chapter 11, verse 3. The integrity of the upright guides them, but the crookedness of the treacherous destroys them. A man's integrity isn't decoration. It's load-bearing. Take it out, and eventually the whole structure comes down. His marriage, his business, his reputation, and yes, his walk with God. And that brings us to the third pillar, wisdom and kindness. And I want to be clear here, because this is the one that culture twisted the hardest. Kindness is not the absence of strength. It's strength that has somewhere to go besides your own ego. Paul, writing to the church at Corinth in 1 Corinthians chapter 16, verses 13 and 14 said, "Watch, stand firm in the faith, act like men, be strong, let all that you do be done in love." Now read that again. Paul doesn't say be strong or be loving, pick one. He puts them in the same two sentences on purpose. Strength and love aren't opposites in Scripture. They're supposed to travel together. Let's look at Jesus. And I mean actually look at him, not the soft, harmless version half of America grew up picturing. This is the same man who took a whip made of cords and cleared out the temple courts because his father's house was being turned into a marketplace. Now, we're talking about righteous anger, controlled and purposeful. The same week, he got on his knees and washed his disciples' feet, including the feet of a man who would betray him hours later. Same man, same week, a whip in the temple and a towel at the table. That's not a contradiction. That's what strength under control actually looks like. Go back to Solomon, young king. God offers him anything he wants, and Solomon doesn't ask for wealth, long life, or the death of his enemies. He asks for wisdom. In 1 Kings chapter 3, verse 9, Solomon asked God, "Give your servant, therefore, an understanding mind, that I may discern between good and evil." James, writing in James chapter 1, verse 19, gives men a simple formula. Let every person be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger. Now, quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger. Run that through your last argument with your wife or your kid and see how differently it would have gone. Solomon writes in Proverbs chapter 29, verse 11, "A fool gives vent to his spirit, but a wise man quietly holds it back." That's not a weakness either. Holding your tongue when you've got every right to unload is one of the harder things a man will ever do. And Scripture calls it wisdom, not passivity. Now, on kindness, go to the Good Samaritan, a man beaten half to death on the side of the road, and it's not the religious professionals who help him. It's an outsider with every cultural excuse to walk past, who instead pays for the man's care out of his own pocket with zero expectation of ever seeing him again. Jesus, telling the parable in Luke chapter 10, verse 33 through 35, said the Samaritan had compassion and took care of him. Whatever more you spend, I will repay you. So the Samaritan had every excuse to walk past. He didn't. He paid for a stranger's recovery and expected nothing back. That's not softness. That's what real strength looks like when nobody's watching. Now, here's the theft. Culture handed men exactly two options: be aggressive or be a doormat. It erased the entire category of man who's strong and gentle at the same time. So kindness got filed under weakness, manners got filed under old-fashioned, and nice guy became an insult instead of a compliment. Culture wants men to think they must be a doormat, that strength is toxic. You are either one or the other. God gave men a third option, and it's and the actual intended option: be strong and be kind. Many men just forgot that that was on the table. And here's a founding father's insight I don't want to pass or skip, because it ties straight back to freedom. James Madison wrote in Federalist 51, "If men were angels, no government would be necessary." Now, his point: free self-government only works if the men living under it can govern themselves first. Their own tempers, their own tongues, and their own appetites. A nation of undisciplined men can't stay a free nation for long. Wisdom and self-control aren't just personal virtues. They are the maintenance a free country requires to keep it running. So there you have it. 3 pillars: leadership and protection, truth and integrity, wisdom and kindness. Every one of them straight out of the blueprint God wrote, long before culture ever got its hands on the manuscript. So, coming up, I'm going to hand you 4 concrete moves to take all of this back, starting next week, not someday, this week. Stick around. I'm your host, George Hayes. I'll be right back.
You're listening to the George Hayes Radio Podcast.
I want to take a moment to talk about something important, and that is the blueprint to success. A lot of people think it's some great secret, or that success is reserved for the lucky few. Let me be clear, it's not about luck. It is about the choices you make every single day. Are you investing in yourself? Are you surrounding yourself with the right people? Are you taking action even when it feels uncomfortable? That is what success looks like. Showing up, doing the work, and staying focused on your goals. That's why the George Hayes Radio Podcast exists. We're here to give you the tools and motivation to take that next step, no matter what that might be. So here's what I want you to do. First, hit that subscribe button. Second, go to HayesNation.com to join a community of people just like you, folks who know that success doesn't happen by accident. And finally, share this episode with someone who needs to hear this message. Keep doing the work. Stay focused. Surround yourself with the right people, and your success story will happen.
Hayes. The George Hayes Radio Podcast wants to hear from you. Tell us what motivates you or describe that obstacle standing in your way. You could be featured on an upcoming episode. Send your story via email to georgehayes@usa.com. That's georgehayes@usa.com.
Okay, well, welcome back to the show. Hey, if you want to reach out to me, it's georgehayes@usa.com. That's georgehayes@usa.com. I want to hear your story. If you're building a life of prosperity, maybe you're struggling or somewhere in between, send me a line, and who knows, maybe I'll reach out and feature you on an upcoming episode. So I have watched up close for 4 decades what happens when a man leads with integrity and what it costs everyone around him when he doesn't. For me, it's not just a theory. That's a career's worth of Monday mornings. So I'm going to make this practical and easy to follow. 3 pillars, 3 action steps, all tied directly back to the first segment. Plus, I'm going to add one more that ties all of it together. Things you can start doing this week, not someday. Now, if you remember, the first is leadership and protection. You don't need a title to lead. You need to start where you are. That means leading your household spiritually, even if, and especially if, you don't feel qualified. Pray out loud with your family. Open the Bible at your kitchen table. Nobody's going to hand you permission. You just start doing it. Joshua declared it for his own house in Joshua chapter 24, verse 15. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. That's not a plaque for your living room wall. That's a decision made in advance, before the day even starts throwing choices at you. Say it out loud in your own house this week. Under your roof, make the declaration that you and your family will serve the Lord. You need to stop waiting for permission because nobody's ever going to give it to you. You just do it. Now, protection. Protection isn't just physical. Protect your home from what's coming through the phone and the TV. Protect your wife's peace. Protect your kids from a culture that is actively recruiting them into confusion. That's guard duty. You need to stand guard. And don't just guard against, build toward. A man who leads doesn't just block bad influences, he supplies good ones. Have one conversation this week where you actually ask your kids or your wife what's weighing on them, and then lead them somewhere. Scripture, prayer, plain, honest counsel, instead of just handing it back to them to figure out. Okay, the second pillar, truth and integrity. Jesus put it in the simplest terms possible. In Matthew chapter 5, verse 37, let what you say be simply yes or no. Anything more than this comes from evil. No hedging, no fine print, no walking it back later because it turned out to be inconvenient. This week, tell one hard truth you've been avoiding to your spouse, your kids, your business partner, even yourself. And keep one promise you were tempted to let slide. That's the whole assignment. Integrity isn't built in a grand gesture. It's built in the boring, repeated choice to do what you said you would do. Integrity isn't a personality trait that you're born with. It's 100 small promises you kept when it would have been easier to let them slide. Now, here's a gut check question to run this week. Is there a lie you're currently telling by omission? The thing you haven't said, the conversation you keep dodging. Silence can be just as dishonest as a lie. Say the hard, true thing this week in love, but say it. Now, that brings us to the third pillar, wisdom and kindness. Paul gives the standard for a man's speech in Ephesians chapter 4, verse 29. Let no corrupting talk come out of your mouths, but only such as is good for building up, as fits the occasion, that it may give grace to those who hear. Practice the pause. Before you respond in anger this week, say at your kids, your wife, a coworker, some fool on the freeway, take one breath and ask, is this the wise man from Proverbs or the fool who vents everything? Is what I'm about to say building somebody up or just unloading on them? And go out of your way to be kind to somebody who can't do anything for you. That's the test of real strength. Kindness with nothing to gain. Always remember that real strength shows up when you're kind to somebody who can't do a single thing for you in return. All right, I told you there's a fourth thing that ties all of this together, and that is multiply it. Pass it to the next generation. This is the fourth thing that to piece all of this together. And, I'll be honest with you, I almost left this out because it's bigger than, a to-do list item. But it might be the most important one. Remember that statistic from earlier? Roughly 1 in 4 kids in this country is growing up without a father in the home. That gap doesn't close. It closes when men who found the blueprint hand it to somebody younger than them. Moses handed it to Joshua. Paul handed it to Timothy. And that's not a coincidence. That's the entire model behind our anchor verse this episode. God gave fathers the same instruction all the way back in Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 6 and 7. These words that I command you today shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise. And Paul told Timothy directly in 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 2, what you have heard from me, entrust to faithful men who will be able to teach others also. That's the chain, or the link, if you will. Somebody hands it to you, you live it. Then you hand it to somebody else, your son, a nephew, a young man on your crew, a child at church who doesn't have a dad in the picture. This week, find one younger man or boy and say one true thing to him, something somebody once had said to you. The blueprint only works when it is handed down. You didn't get this blueprint just to keep it. You got it to hand off to another boy, young man, or father. Men, hear me on this. Nobody is coming to hand your identity back to you gift-wrapped. It was stolen quietly, one message at a time over decades. So we take it back the same way, quietly, one decision at a time, starting in your own house, starting this week. It's not weakness. That's not going backward. That's going back to the blueprint and building something better on it than the culture ever could give you credit for. So let's circle back to where we started. Somebody stole something from American men: leadership, protection, truth, wisdom, and kindness. And they took it piece by piece for decades. But stolen doesn't mean gone. It means just waiting for somebody to go get it. Okay, here's my challenge this week for you. Pick one of the pillars we covered: leadership and protection, truth and integrity, wisdom and kindness, or handing it off to the next generation. And then I encourage you to do one concrete thing about it in the next 24 hours, not someday, this week. You can reach me at georgehayes@usa.com. I want to hear from you. Leave me a comment on YouTube. Which point hit you the hardest? What are you going to do about it? And as always, thank you for being part of the Hayes Nation. I am your host, George Hayes. New episodes drop every Monday morning on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and everywhere you get your podcasts. Subscribe if you have not, and share this one, because some man in your life has been quietly wondering if it's just him. And it's not just him. Give him this message. And as always, remember, keep that train rolling down the track, because that light at the end of the tunnel, well, it just might be you. I will see you next time.
It's time to smash that like button and subscribe. To share or leave comments, log on to YouTube at the George Hayes Radio Podcast, or visit us online at HayesNation.com.